Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. I hope you're having a fantastic day. So today with me, I have, and we're live. So Pastor Matt, that's his wife, Victoria. Hey, my kids run on the show all the time. They'll run in.
It's awesome. Yeah. When your family comes on, it's real, huh?
Yes. So really quickly, a little bit about you. You're pastor of On Fire Ministries. You served in the military. You're the one who introduced me to General Flynn. You have a lot of insight to what's going on with Venezuela, with the attempted coup of President Donald Trump, with what's happening. Yeah. This is what I want to talk about today. But really quickly, just you haven't been on for a while. Introduce yourself to the audience.
So I'm a pastor in Spokane, Washington at On Fire Ministries. I served 10 years in the United States military. And served 12 years in the Washington State Legislature, specifically writing laws and evaluating election integrity issues in the Washington Legislature, which is germane for our topics today. And also, I have analyzed jihadis and communists and exposed their networks for a very long time, before it was even really known or understood in modern terms. So back in 2012, 2014 timeframe, that's when we were exposing those kind of things all the way up until today. That's just kind of brief history. And then as well, we have our own podcast and show broadcast across all of Northwest Montana and Northeast Oregon and most of Washington and North Idaho.
And really quickly, I just got a comment. Someone said they have no volume. By the way, if you do have volume, just looks like that's only one person. Churn it up. Ladies and gentlemen, smash that thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed. Now, I want to dive right into this. Number one, Venezuela. What is happening? You have intel. You know more, right? Yeah. And you actually warned me about this, like right after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, when we had some when we had some lunch together. You said there are sleeper cells in our country. They're being activated. Take us into that and the whole Venezuela situation.
So really want to kind of take a step back and talk about what narco-terrorism actually is. The cartels are working as proxies for China, for Russia, and for Iran, among others. There's others as well. I'm just going to highlight those today, to attack the United States. And the main platform that they've been using is Venezuela. So these proxies have been attacking the United States, not just through drugs and not just through sex trafficking and human trafficking, but they've been attacking the United States through things like our election system. And they've been attacking the United States through political warfare, which I think is extremely important to talk about because it goes very much represented and under-acknowledged, especially at a national level when we talk about these policy debates. And then also an info war campaign. So you have a fifth-generation warfare, which is the battle of ideas and narratives. They have also been a part of that, and they've been using Venezuela as a hub to do that. Now, backing up again, Cuba and Cuban intelligence is really effectively running Venezuela. Again, not a lot of people talk about this. They are side by side with Maduro. And in fact, it's pretty clear now that Maduro can't do much without his Cuban handlers giving the okay. So with that kind of context, President Trump has acknowledged that Venezuela is a problem in our hemisphere. Now, back at the founding generation, President James Monroe developed what was called the Monroe Doctrine, which said that the United States would execute sovereignty in the Western Hemisphere for U.S. interests. That doesn't mean we own things or we're creating an empire. It meant that if there's something in the Western Hemisphere that comes against U.S. interests, the Monroe Doctrine would say that we would weigh in on those interests to keep forces out. Now, back at that time, it was forces like France, Great Britain, and Spain. Today, we're talking about Russia, China, and Iran. And so Venezuela being used as this hub to attack the United States of America, Trump is going in to take that out. If I was going to summarize it in one sentence, it's been a hub used by the deep state as well to attack the U.S., and Trump wants to clean it all out.
Now, Dominion voting machines. A lot of people are saying that Dominion is tied to Venezuela. Is that true?
Well, it is, but it's bigger even than, again, it's bigger than that. Back in 2016, a Chinese intellectual who, in fact, has a lot of influence among the Chinese ruling elite named Jin Rong. This guy advocated for attacking the United States through our election system. And so there is very good evidence, and you've heard a little bit about this over the last few months with the FBI director coming out, Kash Patel coming out and talking about how there's connections with China attacking our election systems. There's very good evidence out there that will be revealed that shows that China, through both Panama banking and Venezuela, attacked the United States election systems back in 2020. And I think that's what's going to be coming out in the future and what bears a lot of investigation. So again, this is bigger than drugs, bigger than human trafficking. This is also what is very clearly an act of war by foreign adversaries against the United States. We just have not truly said it out loud yet. Now, the Venezuelans, again, there's a huge freedom movement in Venezuela that's been driven underground. We need to acknowledge that. There is a large Christian population in Venezuela that we need to acknowledge as well that would want to see Maduro gone. And the Venezuelans struck a deal with the Biden administration that they would get back some of their people who were in jail in the United States of America in return for doing free and fair elections. Well, they got their people back, but they never did free and fair elections because the Biden administration was weak. And so now we're at a place where Maduro isn't the legitimate president of Venezuela because he literally lost that election. That's why the leader of the opposition was recognized for the Nobel Peace Prize this last go around. So the point here is this is bigger than just drugs. That's important. This has been used as a hub for proxy attacks against the United States by nation states and by the deep state.
Yeah, I remember their election. It was, I believe, like 6-7 months before our presidential election. People are celebrating, right? It's a clear victory for the opposition party. And out of nowhere, Maduro comes out, says, nope, those are fake numbers, has people arrested. There's military everywhere. Now, I want to move a little bit. Okay, so we have that going on. Before we get to the Russia-Ukraine thing, because it's, my opinion is Europe doesn't want peace. I mean, I'm looking into this, but we'll get to that in a second. The coup in America. There is a orange color Bolshevik revolution right now happening in our country. I've been covering this for 2 weeks straight. What General Flynn is saying, what others are saying. There is an attempted coup. Just right now, I was reading. Let me pull this up on the screen just so that it's there. Leak. Pentagon Inspector General classified report finds Hexeth signal chat violates regulations, puts United States personnel at risk. They're going after Pete. They're going after, we know Tulsi Gabbard is being attacked like crazy, Pam Bondi, all of them, but they don't like Pete. And, they're trying to go after Trump and his administration. Break that down. What to expect? How can people stand against this? Just regular folks that, like our audience, like me. What can we do, besides prayer, which we have to always pray for our president and his team? But what's happening? How do you think this is going to play out?
So Pete Hegseth, first of all, is one of President Trump's strongest cabinet picks. He is solid on worldview, he is solid on strategy, and he's very solid on America first. Now, that said, they think that if they get Pete Hegseth, then they have a clear path to President Trump. So this is all the same tactic and strategy that was used in his first administration to undermine him. But this time, Trump was a lot more savvy in keeping a little bit of a distance. So Pete Hegseth is an obstacle to the deep state and the disruption of the second Trump administration. So President Trump ultimately holds the cards here. President Trump should just stick by Pete Hegseth, and then this thing is done. So it's interesting. They're trying to resurrect all these, Pete Hegseth, violated this regulation. Pete Hegseth is a war criminal and all this nonsense that they're putting out there. And I'll address the war criminal allegation here in a quick second. All this nonsense that they're putting out there. But the fact of the matter is that Pete Hegseth is effective, and that's why the deep state is coming after him. Pete Hegseth is America first, and he's been extremely effective at reasserting U.S. dominance worldwide and the United States interests worldwide that were severely damaged, as was our reputation, by the Biden administration. So it's interesting that they care now, today, about strikes on narco-terrorists, but didn't say anything about the intel that they had that would have prevented the Abbey Gate bombing in Afghanistan that killed American service members, and the whole pullout there that created a massive ripple effect and allowed not just the Taliban, but Hamza bin Laden and Al-Qaeda to reconstitute a threat to the United States of America. Nobody's talking about that, right? In the mainstream media. I know we, of course, are in the alternative media, and I'm not going to call it the alternative media anymore. I'm going to call it the true media and the real media. The fact of the matter is that Pete Hegseth, when a Secretary of Defense gives an order to take out narco-terrorists like that, there is a whole targeting cycle that people have to go through, and specifically the general in charge of the operation has to go through. You have to pick the target. You have to vet the target. You have to assess the risk of friendly casualties. You have to run it by a JAG lawyer. Then you have to redo this cycle again. So when Pete Hegseth gave the order, he wasn't sitting there looking at a screen. And this is the way they made it sound. He wasn't sitting there like looking at a screen waiting for two dudes hanging on a boat to give an order to do a strike again. He had given the initial order to the general in charge. And now we find out that this has been completely debunked by no less than the New York Times. The New York Times has debunked the Washington Post. So this is all nonsense. The real play here is part of what you're talking about. That is an attempted color revolution in the United States of America to overthrow the Constitution. That means these people that are behind this color revolution, that are seeking to overthrow the Constitution of the United States, are by definition traitors and are by definition acting in a treasonous manner.
Yeah, and I tell people, study the Bolshevik Revolution. We are more than halfway through, even with, the 4D chess, king and the president, his generals have everything in charge. The Bolsheviks, they even had a rumor that they spread through their, proxies, like the pastors and everything. It was literally called Operation Trust. Don't worry. The king and then they used really popular generals like General Flynn. They and the king have everything in control. They're in charge. This is why the king was murdered and his family in 1917. But the Soviet Union was not officially established till 1924 because half the country believed the king was still alive, in hiding with his generals and still in control. And any day now, they're coming back to save us. It's like we're looking, the judges, woke judges, releasing people and I tell people, study your political history. That's how we will know, can educate ourselves on how to fight back. Now, I want to move on to this issue really quickly. Russia, Ukraine. Really quickly, in my opinion, Zelensky is going to fill his pockets with a bunch of money, just like a bunch of his people did. I don't know if he released a show called Servants of the People.
Yes, I knew about that. Actually, before he was even president. Yep.
Do you know that in that show, a man by the name of Yarmak, who was in the show, who was in charge of the energy sector, stole a bunch of money and flew to Israel. A month ago, a guy by the name of Yarmak, who literally works for Zelensky.
He's his chief of staff.
Yes, and he was like in charge of not Yarmak, Yetzik. Yarmak just left 2 days ago. Yetzik was the one also in the movie. Dude's last name was Yetzik. I just confused those because they start the same. Also was in charge of the energy sector, stole at least $100 million from the American taxpayer, fled to Israel. And then, it's like we're watching a movie. It's like everything that happened there, plus there was another TV show in the UK in 2017. The same invasion, the same it plays out, like everything. Like even the president in that show, his name was Zelensky, who then runs away from his country, and then the Russians hunt him down. Like, I don't think Europe wants peace the way they're treating Trump, the way they're treating these peace negotiations. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think we're ever going to get to peace?
Well, this is an interesting discussion. So, first of all, the best thing that we can lead with in any of these foreign policy discussions is, how is this going to affect the Christians? It's how we should have evaluated policy in the Middle East. It's how we should evaluate policy between Ukraine and Russia. And the fact of the matter is, Ukraine is the breadbasket of spirituality in Europe. It has the largest Christian population. That's just a fact. The other fact is that the Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, was heavily infiltrated by the KGB during the Cold War, and the metropolitan that is in charge of it right now was a KGB asset. Those are facts, okay? And so there is also the fact that Putin in eastern Ukraine shut down a lot of churches, including Protestant churches. There's many videos of these shutdowns happening. Okay, we get that out on the table. Does Russia want peace? Well, according to former Soviet defectors, it was always the plan for Russia to invade Ukraine. Now, NATO is not helping the matter. And the comments by NATO this week were absolutely reprehensible. I cannot believe they would come out during the middle of peace negotiations and say, well, maybe we should attack Russia and go on the offensive. I mean, literally, the statement from, and these weren't the highest level NATO officials. They were, of course, the second tier because they wanted to float the trial balloon. Why would you do that? If you really want peace, why would you do that? So I think what's happening, again, stepping back, is you have the deep state and globalist actors undermining President Trump and his attempts at bringing peace to the world. So yes, to the answer is, I don't know if NATO wants peace because of their comments this week. But on the other side, we have to recognize that the Russians have an interest in a buffer zone, and they always have in that part of Europe. They always have. All the czars wanted a buffer zone, every single one of them, because that's how Russia was always invaded. So we have to understand the Russian perspective there as well. It doesn't mean we're pro-Russia, but I mean, shouldn't we want peace? And then we have the third factor here, is Zelensky caught up in corruption? Well, I mean, when your chief of staff gets canned because of a corruption investigation, that seems to imply that there was pressure put on by President Trump for that guy to be canned. And the whole thing right now is a gigantic mess. And really the only one that is speaking sanity right now is President Trump in this. I mean, obviously Rubio and the rest of them that are working for peace and the special envoys. But the question really is, for me, not even can we get to peace right now, it's what happens afterwards. Is NATO just gearing up for another conflict? Because the rhetoric needs to be completely dialed down, and Russia warned NATO for years about this as well. So kind of the lessons that I take out of this, number one, the Russian army was not as strong as everybody predicted, but those of us who analyzed it closely knew that the Russian army was not as strong as was predicted. Number two, Ukraine has been used to launder deep state finances for a very long time, and therefore there's a deep state interest, a Western globalist interest in Ukraine. And number three, we need to make some hard decisions as America. Do we want to see peace in the world, or do we want to keep poking the Russian bear so that we're in a perpetual state of war? And again, I think the lessons out of this going forward for me right now are more important even than can we get to peace at this point. Because I agree with you, the rhetoric coming out of NATO is not helping, but I also understand that Putin has to have some kind of assurances of a buffer zone, because that's always been the goal of the Russian leadership for the last 3 centuries.
Yeah, and if you look at like even what NATO did today, they came out and said we're raising $1 billion a month for weapons for Ukraine, and we're halfway through the year for next year. So Trump is trying to make a peace deal. They're raising $12 billion for next year. They're not even thinking about peace. Europe, NATO, they're not thinking. And here's the crazy part about it. They still all buy Russian oil and gas. So does Turkey. So does Israel. So all these countries. Israel hasn't even put a single sanction on Russia.
Well, and I think Trump called. Well, I think he called out the duplicity with that. That they're funding their own self-identified enemy, right? I mean, and I am not a Putin supporter. Putin is never renounced his affiliation with the Communist Party. He was a former KGB colonel. I am not a fan, obviously, of shutting churches down in eastern Ukraine and persecuting Protestant Christians in eastern Ukraine. In fact, I'm 100% against it. It's abhorrent. We should have a very clear statement on that publicly. But I think the moral clarity here is what happens after this, and has Putin or his successor been emboldened, or any other person around the world been emboldened to just go take territory? Because if they wait long enough, there's going to be peace. I mean, there's this other consideration here. And I think we need to talk about it, and talk about it openly. Now, with Putin, he also is very clear on his intentions. And I don't know if we're going to get there, because I don't think in his mind he has achieved the buffer zone that he desired. And so the sanctions will continue. But you brought up the very good point. Are the sanctions really effective if the Europeans are buying oil from Russia? And the answer is absolutely they can't be. And the only, the people that suffer are the soldiers. I mean, I'm just going to make this a little bit more personal. I mean, the people that suffer are the soldiers on the ground, on both sides, to be honest with you. It's the Russian men being sent into the meat grinders, Ukrainian men being sent into meat grinders. Those are the people that are suffering on the ground.
Yeah, I have a lot of family and friends that died on both sides. A guy who me and him were born in the same room one day apart. He's dead. Died on his first day going out. The Russians came in and drafted him because he only had 2 kids, not 3. Died first day in the front. Ukraine, like last week I was speaking to a friend of Julie's, her cousin, and he said 4 funerals in 3 days. All guys from my team. It's sickening. It's disgusting. And then when you look the way, and I'll say this, Europe never looked at Ukraine as an ally. I'm not saying Russia did either, but both of these countries look at Ukraine as like, we're 2 superpowers, the EU and Russia, and you're in the middle, and no one cares about it. That's the worst part about it. Europeans are ready to send their soldiers to die fighting against Russia. They're willing to, like Joe Biden said, I'm quoting him, we're going to arm Ukraine until the last Ukrainian, not until victory, until the last Ukrainian. It sucks.
Well, and I think that, the globalists win in this sense if this continues. So Ukraine has a large Pentecostal and Baptist population. Yep. A large Protestant population, and it's sandwiched between Poland, which is predominantly it's like 90% Catholic plus, and Eastern Orthodoxy, the Orthodox Christian Church in Russia. So what is happening in Ukraine is Christians killing Christians, and so of course the globalists don't mind that happening, because that removes an obstacle to their ultimate attempt at one world government, one world religion, and one world economy. And so and those aren't my words, by the way. If you read their documents, they actually say this stuff, and they believe this stuff. So I think moral clarity, protecting Christians, whether it's Nigeria or Ukraine, I think moral clarity on Putin, moral clarity on Zelensky. We shouldn't be propping up corruption as the United States taxpayer. We shouldn't be propping up Western globalists or Eastern globalists. And we should acknowledge that President Trump is the one that is actually bringing everyone to the table and has gotten farther probably than anyone expected he would. So anyway, that's how I would see that. And again, all the instability that's happening right there is all part of the globalist ploy to try to drag us into World War III. But you and I have already talked about that on a previous show.
Yeah, no, we're praying we're praying it sucks, but you look like every time it looks like Trump's about to get to peace, like out of nowhere, Macron flies in, there's a meeting, and then it's just like, that's it. And what's the guy, the bald guy that prophesies? He prophesied Trump getting shot in the right ear. It actually happened. You know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Last week, he actually prophesied, and he said Macron is the reason there's no peace in it's a long prophecy. He talks about how he goes in and like Zelensky fears Macron. That's who he fears more than anybody, not more than Trump, more than Putin. And there was one negotiation where the Russian negotiator, when he came back, he was doing an interview and he said, you know what's sad? He's like, I was born in the Soviet Ukraine. And his eyes get teared up when he said this. He said, I was born in Kyiv during Soviet Union times. He said it. And we're sitting there and we're like, well, we could work with this, right? This is a peace deal. He's like, we presented to them. And this was still under Biden. He said, and the Ukrainian side looks at us and says, it's easy for you to present a peace deal to us because you have one boss. We have three. And all three of them need to, and he's like, how can we negotiate? He's like, when the country's completely run by America, UK. And that's the sad part about Ukraine. It's always been run by foreign governments. For the last question, I want to play this clip. We're in election season again, right? Midterms are almost here. So there was, here's the video. There was alleged fraud being set up to take place to rig the 2024 election, but it was caught by Elon Musk.
Yep.
I want to roll this 4-minute clip. And I want to get your reaction. And what do we do?
Elon was not involved other than vouching because he wanted to be legally pure. And it was all done super legally through Cyber Command. The information was taken to Cyber Command and the United States government through its existing legal authorities, zapped a place in Belgrade, Serbia. I heard they smoked. There's ways hackers can get on and defeat security protocols, overclock a processor in your machine, turn off the fan and melt it down. I heard that they melted down some of the computers. Who knows if hackers exaggerated on that. That's what really happened. Elon wasn't part of that because he was trying to be a legal virgin about it all. But he played a super critical role. He had my Zorro. Can I tell you what Zorro said after spending an afternoon with him? It was a funny story. Yes, please. He says that we love the color. Guy. He says Elon is maybe even weirder than you. he's just a weird guy. And I go in, so Zorro does have his presentation. And if you really just let him give his presentation at his own speed without going into detail, soup to nuts is a 6-hour presentation. He's been a master at compressing and taking out slices because he gives all these different pieces to all these different parts of the government and such. But Elon said, I don't want that. Just give me, do you have any documents? And he said, Zorro said, yeah, we got 1.7 million documents. And Elon says, give it to me on the thumb drive. He took it, put it in his machine, and AI read it for 45 minutes or something and came back with a 1-page report that told the story and said it was correct and said that it all held together and everything was well documented. And at that point, things were set up for Elon to get on something like a Zoom call. And then some lawyers got involved, as they always do. And they said, he can't, it's too incriminating for him. He's taking part in whatever. And so I think what I heard was he had some technical assistance to it. And then they came back and reported to him. But I'm told that he turned to the senator when he was done digesting. Oh, then he got Zorro to give him the PowerPoint. But he said, now I will take your PowerPoint, but just let me click through it. And he clicked through this 6-hour presentation in 10 or 15 minutes, just absorbing everything. He's really, my Zorro says he's like on a different planet. The guy's but he just sat there clicking high speed through this presentation, then showed total command of it. But then, and once it was all verified, he turned to the senator and said, this is all true, and we're effed. And the senator said, no, if you vouch for it, there's a way this can be neutralized. And that's the day, that afternoon, it was when Elon jumped on a jet and went up to Pennsylvania and joined Trump and started coming out and saying, look, civilization comes to an end if we don't. That was that afternoon. And Elon vouched for it. And because he vouched for it to Trump, other processes were set in motion where Zorro was taken into the Pentagon, to a Pentagon-ish, and it was all taken from him. Now, we had this information. That's the other, but we had this information from the people about, that we had a bribed intelligence officer in Eastern Europe. Also, he was doing things but he was taking bribes to pay around Belgrade to get certain information. We had this whole operation, and we had this Albanian gangster. We had this whole.
So he's talking about Elon Musk leading up to the 2024 election. Okay, but has the issue been fixed? Yeah, we overcame it. We made it too big, too rigged. We swamped the vote. We did all this. But has the issue been fixed?
Yeah, so here's the mechanics of elections. And again, I did this and wrote legislation and policy for the Republican caucus in Washington State on this exact issue. Here's the mechanics of how it works. First of all, if you have an electronic voting machine, the first threshold question is, can it be accessed from the outside? There's a couple of ways it can be. If it has a hardwired connection, it has some sort of a cell phone or even another Bluetooth antenna, something built into the circuit board or attached to the circuit board there, you can access it from outside. That is not supposed to happen in most jurisdictions. Now, in 2020, 2024, the allegation was that there were computers in foreign countries. And I did hear about Serbia for 2024, heard about potentially Venezuela or another country for 2020, accessing voting machines in the United States and changing the results. What was proven, or what can be proven is what MAC addresses, so the actual address of the server, the computer that is accessing, you can get that MAC address that's coming in. But to prove fraud, you would have to get physical access of the internal components of the voting machine and then audit it and audit the code in the voting machine. Okay, so you have to have that to actually prove it. Now, this is why the voting machines in Georgia are so important, because that's what Trump wanted to get a hold of in 2020. Vice President Pence did not allow that to happen. And I believe by doing so, he allowed this attack on America to happen. Well, that's something that he needs to be investigated for and held accountable for. I would argue that if you act in a treasonous manner, that you shouldn't just be able to get away with it. And I think all Americans would agree with that. So now what Patrick Byrne's saying is similar thing happened from Serbia. And I've also seen the articles on this and analyzed some of this. But the access was blocked into the voting machines in the United States. So that means, yes, it worked for 2024. However, this is why Trump is saying go back to paper ballots, because the issue still has not been solved. Anytime you have electronic voting machines and any ability potentially to access them, this threat will always be there. That's why we need to go back to paper ballots, and that's why Trump called on every single red state and every single governor and every single auditor or the equivalent of Secretary of State at the state and local level to go back to paper ballots, because you can't truly solve the problem until you get rid of the electronic accessibility from the outside. That's the only way really truly to solve this. Is why Trump's going in that direction.
Yeah, I know he's been pushing, signing executive orders, fighting. Man, if we don't get it by the midterms, who knows what might happen. I mean, yesterday's Tennessee, what was it, seat number 7, right, in District 7? I don't know if you saw the results. I'm worried. Trump won by 22 points. His endorsed candidate just a year ago won by 22 points. And now another Trump-endorsed military veteran beats and someone who makes AOC look like a conservative by a point.
We have to have election integrity. We have to have the districting here in the United States according to the original understanding of the Constitution: one person, one vote, not one non-citizen, one citizen, one vote. And so there is a rebalancing happening, and there is some headway being made. But I agree with you, this needs to speed up dramatically. And I would also point out, we need to know our history. And you and I have talked about this many times, and I've heard some right-wing pundits. I would say they're legitimately, I think, seeking the truth, but they need to understand their history. Look, Stalin was not an ally of the United States. I keep hearing that Russia was a true ally of the United States in World War II. Stalin was not, as a matter of fact, an ally of the United States. He infiltrated 329 confirmed Soviet agents into the United States government, which became the genesis of the deep state that we know today. We know this from the Venona transcripts, from the Troikin archives, and various other Soviet defectors. This is not speculation. So he was not an ally of the United States. That said, is Russia somebody we should negotiate with? 100%. And so I think knowing our history of who we are in the U.S., understanding that there are direct threats to the United States from foreign adversaries, and taking strong, decisive action against them, and protecting Christians wherever we can across the globe, and encouraging them with our businesses and our missionaries, 100%. But in some ways, like in Nigeria, there needs to be U.S. policy, and there needs to be U.S. involvement to protect the Christians on the ground. I am not saying that this is some sort of interventionism. What I am saying is there are ways that we can protect Christians through diplomatic channels that are very, very effective, like, taking foreign aid away. Those are things that we can do immediately and see some pretty dramatic results, and that's what I think needs to happen. And I do believe Trump is headed in that direction. Something happened about 2 weeks ago in the White House. There's been a dramatic shift by President Trump on issues like Islam, on issues like falsified applications for naturalization, and the whole remigration idea that has happened. So I think he's headed in the right direction, and this is what we're going to see over the next year, is a continued push in this direction.
Yeah, no, it's I've looked into, like, the last time we really had a good relationship between United States and Russia was about 200 years ago, in late 1800s, the Russian Empire, and it was Abraham Lincoln, when we were during Civil War, because they were fighting the same deep state bankers that we were, the same ones that killed Abraham Lincoln. They were just pushed out of those same bankers were just pushed out from Russia. But yeah, thank you so much. Let me do this really quick. Let me pull up your channel on the screen, ladies and gentlemen. That is Pastor Matt's YouTube channel right there. Please go subscribe, show him some love. Matthew, again, thank you. We appreciate you. I'm sure I'll have you back on before Christmas.
Thank you, Vlad. It was an honor. Keep up the fight.
Thank you.